there we go. All right. I like your background.
Oh, well, that's good. We see you're much tidier. Like it's absolute chaos here. So that's very nice. It's very restful looking.
Hello there, my name is Richard Sheridan Willis. I am the Artistic Director of the St. Lawrence Shakespeare Festival in Prescott, Ontario. Thank you for watching. In this series of River Talks, I'll be talking to theatre people on their thoughts on theatre, past and present. We will be zooming in for an in-depth, informal chat about themselves, their love for theatre, and how they see it in the future.
So this is the second in our series of River Talks, and this month's guest is the extremely talented and wonderful Janet Irwin. Janet is a highly experienced theatre artist with over 40 years of experience of theatre involvement. I first met Janet back in 2015. She's one of the main reasons I came to the festival, and consequently is one of the reasons I'm sitting here as artistic director in the festival office this morning. So I have a lot to be grateful to Janet Irwin for. Janet works in many, many areas of theatre and the arts, mainly in Ottawa, but she also sits on the board of our St. Lawrence Shakespeare Festival. Janet, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
I am going to start off, if I can find it, by reading your bio. Janet Irwin has over 35 years, 40 years, I think.
Yeah, probably.
Probably more, in Canadian theatre as a director, a playwright, librettist, dramaturge, educator, and performance coach. As a playwright, she has written Side Effects, an agitprop treatment of the pharmaceutical industry and the drugging of women, for the Great Canadian Theatre Company, which had Western and Eastern Canada tours. They All Do It for Odyssey Theatre, a Seaway story for Upper Canada Playhouse, 2 plays and an opera libretto based on Brian Doyle's Angel Square, adaptations of Brian Doyle's Easy Avenue, where she was co-writer for GCTC, and Up to Low, Easy Street Productions, most recently produced by the National Arts Centre English Theatre in 2018. Mm-hmm. She has also co-written a series of audio tapes based on heritage rivers, Talking Up the Rideau River, the St. Lawrence River, and the Ottawa River, produced by Rideau Watch, with former CBC producer-supervisor Gordon Cunningham. As a director, she has mounted productions for the National Arts Centre English Theatre, the National Arts Centre Orchestra, the Great Canadian Theatre Company, Odyssey Theatre, the St. Lawrence Shakespeare Festival, Upper Canada Playhouse, Platypus Theatre, Deluxe Hot Sauce, Opera Lyra Ottawa, Easy Street Productions, the Gladstone, Third Wall Theatre, and Winnipeg Popular Theatre Alliance. She spent a term as president of Theatre Ontario, and in 2015, Janet was awarded the Victor Tolgesy Award for her outstanding contribution to the arts in Ottawa. And I know, because I have your resume here as well, that there is so much more that is not mentioned here. So I'll start off. Where did it all begin? Because it always interests me about someone's childhood and early formative years. So where were you born and where did you spend your early childhood?
I was born in another St. Lawrence community, Cornwall, downriver from Prescott. And Cornwall, most people probably know, it's a small city. It's about 45,000. It was probably about 37,000 when I was a kid. So it didn't have a lot of artistic outlets. But my both parents sang for the operatic society. So I grew up listening and being in rehearsals for all the major operettas. My dad sang in the chorus. He had a nice voice, but you know, it was a good solid voice. My mother had a really spectacular mezzo soprano voice. So she sang Madame Margaret and Pity Sing and all sorts of, you know, many of the mezzo roles. This was a company that performed in the old auditorium at Cornwall Collegiate Institute. So it was one of those lovely old-fashioned auditoriums that are all wood, so acoustically very good. So I spent a lot of time just hanging around that, but I didn't really think about, I didn't have a great voice. I didn't think about being a singer, but I liked the music. So I went to a high school and did a couple of high school plays. I think as a kid, even as an elementary school kid, though, I was kind of interested in whenever there were pageants or whatever around, you know, being part of a Christmas pageant or maybe singing. I did duets with my sister for the Sunday school Christmas concert, you know, that kind of thing.
So that happened when you were quite young.
Yeah, that would be 7, 8, 9, you know, that kind of thing.
Anyway, I think those are really important years.
Yeah.
Like the formative years, they kind of influence us all the way through.
Well, I do think about them a lot, and I still have quite vivid pictures of those operettas, and also the terrifyingness of, you know, singing in front of 75 people in a church hall. That was also exhilarating and terrifying. You
were nervous when you were singing?
Oh yes, yeah. That's probably one of the reasons why I've never performed a lot. I never felt that was a huge strength. I was always, as you noticed, probably a quick talker. So whenever I would try to do something, that I would say, slow down, can't understand you. So I thought, oh, well, you know what, maybe I need to do something else. But I was all, I got quite interested in theater in high school and acted a bit. Even though I spoke quickly, I somehow or other managed to get through it. I went off to Queen's for an honors English degree. And partway through, I was seduced by the lure of the theater department and all the troubled young men and the high drama of the green room. And so I switched over and did a combined major of English and theater. So this is really speaking to not very good training on my part, right? Because I missed a lot in both. You know, I didn't do a lot of acting. I remember one of my theater teachers remarking to someone, "Well, it's always nice to have Jan in the class. She's not a very good actor, but she's good in the class." So that kind of showed me where I should be. I did some teaching. I went off to University of Toronto after Queen's and did a teaching degree and taught for a couple of years. But it was great being in the class. But there was something about the rhythm of teaching, and it was the similarity of the calendar moves in the same way and the courses move in the same way, and a lot of it's quite bureaucratic. So I knew that I kept taking theater jobs and then leaving them after a year or a year and a half or half a year or whatever. So I started to think this is probably not for me. I was still in Cornwall at the time and met and became friends with James Tate. You met Jimmy at Up to Low.
Right.
And at that time, Jimmy was a young student at Ryerson. Then he must have left because there was a hiatus for him, and we decided that we would start a theater company in Cornwall. So we decided that we wanted to write plays and perform plays about Eastern Ontario.
And were you acting at that time?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
But also directing. Everybody was doing everything because we were very influenced and inspired by the theater movement at the time, which was the collective creation. So the actors going into communities and investigating the communities. So we decided that we would become the investigative theater group of Cornwall and Eastern Ontario. So our first project was about the unemployment situation in Cornwall. And it was a time when Cornwall too was just going through, physically, they were going through a movement to turn all the streets into one-way streets. So we used that metaphorically as this is what happens to you in Cornwall. You know, you're always down a one-way street. And we performed it in the old, now these things are all defunct now, of course, the old beautiful theater in Cornwall, the Capitol Theatre, which was originally a touring house, a vaudeville house, and then became a movie theater. And it had one of those atmospheric ceilings that you could sit waiting for it to happen, and the lights would play in all different ways in the theater. So we performed it there, and it was such a loss because the acoustics were perfect. It was a shell, in a wooden shell inside a brick shell with about a yard of air between the two walls.
Right.
So acoustically stunning. And then of course they chopped it down and wanted to put in something, and I think a parking lot is there now. So it's a one-way street, you know. So it was great, and we hired, you know, 5 or 6 actors, and we interviewed people, and we did you know, everything you were supposed to do, and then we would read about these other theater companies in Canada who were doing other kinds of things. So I remember a wonderful article in Maclean's about a play about miners in Newfoundland, and just getting the shivers when they talked about the audience members would speak to each other during the play. I remember, do you remember that? Do you mind that one, you know? And I thought that's exactly what, that kind of interaction with the audience is exactly what we want here. So that kind of working with Jimmy on those plays sort of established an aesthetic for me.
Yeah.
And a kind of almost a politic about what theater could do and what it could be in a community. When the theater company in Cornwall closed, I had sort of a couple of years of kind of teaching, not being very happy, not knowing where I fit. And then I moved to Ottawa to be an administrator for a theater company. Didn't do a great job with that because I didn't know how to raise money and didn't know how to interact with boards. So I learned more of that. And then I started to take little directing jobs, you know, and to initiate little projects.
Right.
And that would have been in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And then it kind of built from there.
Yeah, that's what you've been doing ever since. Yeah, it was interesting what you're saying about the community and the politics and involvement. I'm, you know, here at the festival, we're very much community minded.
Yes.
But it also reminds me of my time back in England for a company, the New Victoria Theatre Company, which was the first theatre in the round in England. They actually built it. They started it with Alan Ayckbourn.
Right.
But Peter Cheeseman, who ran it, he was an academic. And his whole approach to theatre was through the community. And that's why we did the Prescott Pandemic Tales recently, because I was influenced by that, because he would go out and find the stories, the older stories in the community, and then, you know, create musical plays with.
Yes.
And I noticed that I mean, music has been a running theme. Your bios says about you that you have a great affection for the classics, political theatre, large casts,
yes,
plays for family audiences, spectacle, outdoor theatre, stories about Ottawa, new work, opera, and other theatre forms where music is integral. Who are your favourite theatre artists? That's a hard question, I think.
Yeah, you know what, I would be hard pressed. I mean, I'm impressed. I'm always sort of impressed and interested in what people are doing in the moments. I like theater where I have questions about it.
You know, it's a long career in theatre. And being creative. And you have, when I think of you, I think of your creative drive, which I think is amazing. What would you say is the secret to your creative longevity, and does it involve taking breaks away or sabbaticals away?
Yes, very much that. I've had over the years, and I was quite alarmed when it happened the first time, and then I got to recognize it. I would have periods where I actually didn't like theater and didn't understand what I was doing when I was in an audience. Like I would ask myself, I don't get what they're doing down there. I don't get what I'm supposed to be bringing to it. Why do this anyway? It first happened after a play I directed at GCTC, which somebody else had chosen. I don't think I really understood it terribly well. It was kind of a dead thing when I saw it on the stage. And after I thought, oh, well, clearly I'm not meant for this, and I'm not going to do anything anymore with theater. But my sister, Kathleen Irwin, who is also she's had a long career as a stage designer, and latterly the last 20 years in the theater department at the University of Regina. And she said, oh, maybe you should try opera. Maybe you should just get yourself into an opera rehearsal hall. And so I applied to Theatre Ontario at that point for an apprentice grant to work with Jeanette Astor at Opera Lyra, which was the local theater opera company, but which was a big, they performed in the big auditorium, Southern Hall at the Arts Centre. And they had, I remember being in one rehearsal period situation with Mario Bernardi as the music director, and I was the assistant to Jeanette, so I was an assistant director or assistant to the director. And I realized the sheer power of everybody being in a not terribly big space, a rehearsal hall space, somebody fantastic on the keyboard, somebody who really understood music directing the singers. Mm-hmm. And it was just, it was such a big experience.
Well, we first met in 2015 like this, online.
That's right. That's true. Yes, I remember that well.
Yeah. So I back in Toronto, you were in Ottawa, I presume, and I auditioned for Romeo and Juliet.
You did. And aren't I glad you did?
Yeah. Well, and there's the beginning of a beautiful friendship, and here I am these years later. So I have you to blame, to thank.
Right, whatever.
Can you tell me, because I don't think I know, how you first became involved with our festival?
Oh, it was in the 2007 maybe. I had but I knew Ian, and I can't remember how I first knew Ian. Maybe it was just because he was there. I knew he had taken over from the previous administrator, AD. Anyway, I had a call from him wondering if he could come and have a cup of tea, and we had a cup of tea here at my place. I can see him on my sofa now, but I didn't quite know what he was looking for. So he was around the same time he asked me to direct, and he asked me to be on the board, and I can't remember which came first, frankly. But he thought it would be, he was looking for a director for Taming of the Shrew, and he was looking for a woman. And it might have been, he might have had someone else hired who couldn't do it, or maybe he was casting around in Ottawa. I don't remember. But I had not, I'd had experience with Shakespeare Ottawa. You may not know this. Earlier than that, had a Shakespeare Festival on one of the islands in the Ottawa River, the Ottawa Shakespeare Festival. And our first director was Bridget Panay. And I had been asked to direct the first show, but I had never directed Shakespeare. So I thought I'd be very happy to assist somebody, because I would really want to watch somebody working with the language. And Bridget was great. We were doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and she did the text work, and she did a lot of stuff that you would recognize. She was very well trained. I'm not sure if she was Rada or where she was from. She'd done some work for the National. So when Ian came, that was really my only. I taught some Shakespeare at high school. I'd liked Shakespeare when I was in high school, and I liked reading it in class out loud, but I really didn't and I'd studied it at Queen's, but, as I say, my Queen's was a bit spotty. So I was in a learning mode, and talked to Ian a bit about that. But he came to me, I think, because he had seen a production of Medea that I had done, and it was outside of the National Gallery. So he said, I want you to come because you were able to make a lot of pictures. He said, I'm very interested in pictures on stage and seeing the, what can be done with the human body. So that was when I came, and then I have been on the board. I could probably find out, but I've, maybe 11 of its 17 years, or how old are we now?
We're 18, I think.
18, something like that. So, but I had been interested in it and was at the first production of The Tempest.
Ah.
Yes.
Right.
So, so I knew that something interesting was happening there and was supportive.
So you are on our board, and you are the only theatre professional on there, I think.
That's right.
I think it'd be interesting to know what a board member does exactly.
Well, I think it depends on your function, within the board. As I look at our board, it seems to be, there are certainly people who are on the side or understand much more about, say, budgeting and audits and that kind of thing, because I notice at the board meetings, they are the ones who can ask the more pointed questions. There are people who know a lot about fundraising, and so that as you know, we've had some very good fundraisers on the board. There are people who are interested in the community, so bring a history of the community. Ian asked me on the board because he just wanted a sounding board. He wanted somebody else to, who was in the profession, to talk to about things. So in the case of our board, I think it's interesting because a lot of people are invested in different ways. I have sat on other boards that meet once a month, review the reports from the AD and the GM, look at larger issues like operating costs, or whatever the larger issues are that are a problem or going well, new initiatives, but they don't have any, on those boards, they don't have the same kind of input.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm always giving input on things. So whenever I would open my mouth, I could see eyes rolling, going, she wants to do something that is, probably not her job right now. So, so it's an interesting situation, because it's always there's a negotiation between why am I here, what is needed, what do I think I want to add, if I saw something and thought I could be helpful in this respect, what is the best way to be helpful, but it's never the same.
I think for me, it's great that you're on our board as a sounding board, but also as a theatre professional who's experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've had a long association with the writer Brian Doyle.
Yes.
A long association.
Yeah. Yes, almost.
You brought a few of. How many books have you brought to the?
I think Angel Square, Easy Avenue, Up to Low. First of all, I should say this for people who might not know who he is. Brian is he's a former a teacher at Glebe Collegiate. He has been a bit of a journalist. He's written a lot for the Ottawa Citizen, but primarily he's famous for writing for young adult. He does young adult fiction, and one of the first in Canada to do that. So he's really kind of the grandfather of YA, young adult fiction. Yeah,
big genre now.
Yes, it's huge, absolutely huge. And his particular role was often the writer who would get young boys to read, because his narrators, he pretty much always has a child narrator. And with two exceptions, one of which I'm currently working on, which is Marianne Alice, and she is a female narrator, but primarily the young boys, and the young boys who are just kind of prepubescent. So for Brian, that's the most clear-eyed human in the world. is this young boy who's just looking at everything and trying to figure it out, and doesn't have a right or a wrong, just doesn't know. You know how boys are, they're kind of clueless sometimes. So
I feel like that all the time.
well, that's right. Well, you've never quite grown up, you see. There you go, Peter Pan. So Mary and Alice might be the fourth, but his stories are so good. Adult people read Brian Doyle. They love to come out to his plays that are based on him or based on his work. But they're also, perfect for young people. And a book like Angel Square, another young adult actor, Tim Wynne Jones, has said Brian with Angel Square has written the perfect book for young people, because it's a mystery. It's set locally, but has universal significance. It's about prejudice and hatred and violence, and about the clear-hearted young people who are going to fight it. It takes place in Lowertown, Ottawa. It takes place in the 2 weeks before Christmas. It's a countdown to Christmas. There's really nothing wrong with this book. He and I have, early on, he was very content to sort of turn the project over to a writer, an adapter, but he was very nervous about it too. So when we were at the Arts Centre, he would spend a lot of time outside around the canal, walking up and down the canal, trying to get up the nerve to kind of come into, see how things were going. But he's a very humble and quiet person, so we didn't want to interfere.
What amazes me is the time that it took for a project like Up to Low.
Yes.
You said you first came across it and thought about it in the 80s.
Yes, that's right.
The actual production was 2015, 2016. That's a considerable time. And I wondered how you managed to keep, were you ever discouraged during that time? Because that's a long time for a project.
Oh, yeah. And I was on and off it. I was doing a lot of other things, but I kept going back to it. It was a bit haunting. And in about 2011 or 12, I started to think seriously about it and how it could be done, and started to raise money for it. So I had a significant birthday. So I threw a party and made everybody pay $30 to come, and had a salad auction and fed them a lot. So, sort of invested in the birthday, which gave me about a purse of about $6,500 to use as a wedge to raise other kinds of money. So the production at Arts Court probably cost us about $115,000 maybe, because we had 8 actors and 3 musicians.
Right.
So it was and these were all union contracts, and we were renting the place, and we were building the set, and we had a publicist, and this was all without other infrastructure. This was the project team with a local, not a board, but a local advisory committee who were invested in the project as well, and who were all hands-on. So that was the production that got the Arts Centre interested. I don't know what they spent on the Arts Centre's budget, but it was considerably more than $115,000,
I remember you walking me around and seeing the set, and it was huge and massive, and I loved the first night. It's a huge work. I wondered, has there been any time, and this is just a personal question, really, that you've thought about being or been approached to be an artistic director with your experience?
Yes, well, there were a couple. I'm not sure if I was approached or I threw my hat in the ring, but I don't think I was ever very convincing in the interviews, and I think it's probably because I wasn't ever really invested in the idea. And it goes a bit back to I'm a much better person working project to project. I'm pretty independent. I like to be my own boss. I like to, I'm very satisfied when I can initiate a project and finish it, no matter how long it takes.
In this series, I'm supposed to be looking at people's roles in theatre. With you, that's a little difficult because you have so many. So anyway, well, let's talk. I just want to talk about you as a director.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've answered it anyway, but what do you like about directing?
I like, one of the things that really appeals to me is putting all the pieces together. So the massive puzzle that is a production. I like working on that. I like very much putting together a collaborative team, like the creative team with whom I work. So I like that. I like the hands-on with the actors. You know, it's I find that very interesting. I like being in a room where there are a lot of brains working on the same scene or piece of text or whatever. One of the things I don't like so much about directing is that you asked me part of the time, I think in one of your questions, is there a period, you're very collaborative, is there a period at which you cease to be collaborative and just say, okay, now it's mine? There is, but I'm still working on how do you, we're working on such short margins. So I find that if I go into a rehearsal hall with all the questions pretty well answered, what comes out the other end is pretty pre-digested.
Yeah.
It's not very interesting, you know, and hasn't made me excited and hasn't necessarily made the actors excited. So I like to, you know, do a lot of reading, look at other productions, whatever, but I like to go in with it fairly open-ended. However, I'm always caught at some point in the rehearsal period, particularly if it's a short one, like a 3 week or, you know, sometimes 2.5 weeks. I'm caught thinking, oh my God, I've left it too long. We've had too many other voices in, and it's hard to get it back on track.
You operate like some of the best directors that I know, which
good.
is collaborative.
Yeah.
With your design team, with the actors, and that's what I try and be. And what I think the problem is that short rehearsal period. And that the ideal time, I once did a show, did The Tempest, and we had a 6-week rehearsal period, which meant that you could play.
Yeah.
You could actually, I did a 2-hour workshop. I was playing Caliban and the actress playing Miranda. We did 2 hours, or in fact, a whole morning playing at being Caliban and Miranda before Prospero imprisoned Caliban, when Miranda and Caliban played together. But there's time to develop relationships. There's time for the actors to really come together. And also the play I did with Daniel Day-Lewis, I remember we threw down the scripts for the first week and a half. We didn't touch the scripts.
Oh, wow.
And we just improvised, found our histories and just improvised all day. What I'm saying is that it's very, I think there is a hard, when you're in such a short rehearsal period, it's a very hard switch, which I think is why I was interested in what you find, that at some point you have to lead. You need to put everybody in a direction, because you have the outside eye.
Well, a good example was, I was always very, very happy with that production of Romeo and Juliet. I mean, I thought, you know, what we got to the stage was strong and passionately told. But as I looked at it later on, I realized that had we had another 3 or 4 days, we could have explored what the set offered us more. Mm-hmm. You know, that there were things just generally that got so strong. I mean, there was the great, one of my really happy memories about that play is when I don't know what you had in your hand, but you were using it as a microphone and singing Blue Moon as Mr. Capulet. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember.
But it was great. And it was a moment of him being kind of, you know, it felt very sort of Italian. It felt very patriarchal, and it also felt kind of lounge lizard. You know, but it was a beautiful thing that, and it stayed, and it was great. But there were things like that were so just kind of idiosyncratic that helped define the family that we probably would have found with more time. And also that lovely big bell that was on stage, and when I saw what the wind would do to it off the river, I thought, oh, there's things that could happen there with that. But you know, it was a good show. So
it was a good show.
Yeah.
What would you say was your most challenging time as a theatre artist.
We're not naturally secure people, theater artists. So, but it was always coming up against my not knowing enough. When I was starting out, there weren't many places to train. There was a National Theatre School, and when I went off to Queen's, I don't think I knew the National Theatre School existed. I came from Cornwall. We just didn't know those things. So I didn't feel that I had the credentials that a lot of other people had, which is why probably I threw myself into as many different experiences as I did, just to be able to say, okay, well, I know a little bit about this now. But I've spent my whole life thinking, well, I know a little bit about this, but I don't know a lot about anything. But I do have certain things that I can trace right back to working with Jimmy in Cornwall in dialogue theater that I can know to be true. And that's a certain contact with the audience, a certain way of hoping that the audience, or working to have the audience invest in the story, a way to not be too pretentious, because we can be very pretentious in theater, and to opt for music and beauty as a way of telling stories, as opposed to maybe terribly insightful insights. I like stories that have something to talk to us about, that have there's a joy in them, even if they don't end well. There's a joy, there's a human spirit, but just to tell that simply and well, basically. I don't think I've always done it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why, but I think you're smart, because that's why you're a good collaborator. Because you could probably, like me, it's a bit like if I need work done in the house.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't do that. I've never been good at that. And I get people who can.
Yeah.
So when I have a designer, good designer will ask me what's going on in my head.
Right.
And and then it's like, they come up with the design.
Yeah.
And you trust those people. I always think, and if it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't work, right? But that's part of the joy of it. It's like sometimes everything comes together and it's beautiful and it's magical, and sometimes it comes together and it doesn't quite work for whatever reason.
Right.
There's no guarantee.
Yeah. And there never is in theater.
There never is, I think, with any art form. Right?
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. One of the things I've found, and I came to directing quite late, but one of the things I do find difficult is the casting process. Yeah. And I wondered, do you like the casting and audition process?
I do like it. I find it a bit agonizing if there are hard decisions to make, but I like the search for the right person. How about you? Do you like casting?
I find it emotionally draining, because I'm always feeling for the actor in the room, which is why I try and make the audition times 20 minutes rather than the usual 10 minutes. But so I try and make it as personal as possible and find out more about them, because obviously, they're going to be, for the festival, they're here they're coming into the community, and they're living together, in a different space altogether as a company. So you're trying to find the right mix of people.
Well, having watched you doing casting, having been with you on a couple of occasions for casting, I appreciate that, because you're very warm with them and very much on their side.
Very much.
Yeah.
You hope that it doesn't have to be, terrifying, and you're hoping that that they'll get something from it, even if they're not cast, right?
That's right.
An experience that they can come out feeling good about themselves.
That's right. Or they've made a friend or something.
Yeah, and that's what you want is for all those people to keep in touch, and and I mean it. We're all part of the same theatre family.
That's right. That's right.
What is your you've been involved in so much. I wondered if you have. I know what my answer would be, but have you got a favorite production that you've worked on besides Our Boy Beetle, of course?
I think up as the latest one, I think Up to Low was the most satisfying, because it was the end of a long process. Mm-hmm. But the other play that haunts me all the time is one that started in Cornwall in 1975, which was a Seaway story. And I think I've talked to you maybe a bit about that. I'm not sure, but it was very much in that mode at the time of, we used taped reminiscences of people who had lost their houses during the inundation of the dam in Cornwall. And 6,500 people were moved off the land and put into new villages, and people died after they moved. You know, a lot of the old people died. It was a very huge upheaval in Eastern Ontario, all in the name of progress. And I did a number of, we did 1975, we toured it a very rough version around a bit. I've done two different ones at Upper Canada Playhouse. One of the two at Upper Canada Village. But I still think we are, in Canada, we are still flooding valleys. We're still moving people. We're still treating populations as if they were pawns on a chessboard. And because it's so tied to the river, and I'm so tied to the river in terms of my emotional, love being, that's why I love being in Prescott, right on the river. But, and I like the notion of the history of navigation and explorers coming up rivers and what stopped them and why they had to go in other directions. And how does the country, I mean, this is all colonial now and we're not supposed to talk about it, but it still is a part of our history.
Yeah.
It still created terrible schisms that still have not healed. So why do we keep doing these things? And so I think that's a story that I'm still kind of working
on. So we talked a little bit about Shakespeare, and I'm saying I'm doing this Shakespeare course at the moment. But I wondered if you thought, as a Ottawa professional theatre person, if there's a place for Shakespeare outside of, since we have the biggest classical theatre company in North America at Stratford, Ontario, whether there's a place for Shakespeare outside of that, when we have this amazing repertory company that does Shakespeare, and not just Shakespeare, but for 9 months of the year.
I think that Shakespeare, it's like being involved in Shakespeare is like being involved in another one of life's big events. Every time you're working on or reading or whatever a play, it's not like just reading any play. It's like, and it's entering a world of history or poetry or a war or a love story or something. So I've been to Stratford many times, but I'm not as excited about what Stratford's doing as I might be about, like the little company that was working in Ottawa in the backyard. I mean, I think Shakespeare really is for everybody. Everybody who's interested, I think, will find him or herself there. So yeah, I think Shakespeare is still I think it's like all great poetry. My life has been largely shaped by a lot of things like Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood. You enter into a work and you find, like Up to Low, you enter into a community or a way of looking at nature or a language, and you are changed by it. And I think theater makes a huge difference. One of the big things just with theater making a difference, it's probably the last interesting thing I might say, is that when we were having a discussion in the at the Arts Centre after, right toward the end of the run of Up to Low, and Brian and a historian were talking to each other for an audience about the language, because language is so important to me and poetry, the language and the lyricism of the Irish in the Ottawa and Gatineau valleys, and how that formed people and how that formed Brian's writing and how it interests people today and how you can hear it if you go Up to Low. And they turned it over to the audience. I may have told you this. And does anybody have something to say? And one woman put her hand up and she said, yeah, I used to, whenever anybody asked me where I was from, I would say, oh, I'm from Low. And now, if anybody asks me the question, they say, I'm from Low. I'm now important because my story has become part of the mythology of the Gatineau Valley. And I think it's the same with Shakespeare. My story has become part of that larger worldview of big stories, passionately told, wonderful language that shaped our language today. There's such a continuum through history of the importance of how languages develop and what our greatest poets is like, our greatest composers. They're not dead. They're not always appreciated,
No.
but they're certainly not dead, and they still speak to us.
Yeah, I agree. I think I raise it because I think I've found during my short time in the country, especially in Ontario, is that there is a resistance to Shakespeare
Yeah.
outside of Stratford, and that's what makes this festival so extraordinary.
Yes.
Is that we're not afraid of it, and that we embrace it and we celebrate.
There are a couple of people who are just saying, you know what, the received opinion on Shakespeare that it's all over and that's 500 years and he's an old white male. That is the mindset that will define a certain 20 years in Canadian thinking, but it doesn't have the strength or the width or the breadth of something like Shakespeare or certain, almost anything that is timeless.
I read an interview that you did with Peter Hinton.
Okay.
Excellent interview when Peter was running the NAC in
Right.
Ottawa. And my next three questions are stolen from that.
Okay.
The first question is, can you say a bit about preparation?
I like to get to know the sort of the nuts and bolts of the story, as where structure is important. I like to know the background to the story and the time, even though I might be interested in setting it at another time. What were the things at play then that we might not have now, like religion? So much of, say, Tudor drama and the Elizabethan drama was so grounded in religion that we don't have now. But what are the big prevailing influences now? I like to watch what other directors have done to see what I can steal, basically. I mean, just to open my brain up and think, oh, I had not thought of that. That's so wonderful. I need to understand the language and how it works for actors. So I need to know where their brains are going to trip up, because mine has tripped up there already, and I've had to dig around to find out what does that actually mean. So it's for a lot of plays, it's that.
The second question I have from your Peter Hinton interview
Yes.
is, what do you bring to the artistic process? Which I think we've probably answered, but
yeah, I think curiosity, maybe openness, excitement, maybe like I'm excited by, if I'm working on a project which I find exciting, I'm usually kind of irrepressible, but I think I have the capacity to maybe bring other people along into the world that we're going into. Other than that, I think I bring a talent for bringing good people together.
Yeah.
And wanting to work with them.
What that brings me to another question. What projects are you working? Can you talk about any of the projects that you have on?
Yeah, the Seaway one is the one that I'm really stuck on at the moment. I think I've talked to you about the pilot who has done flyovers. He's a photographer and he does environmental photographs. And he flew over one day, not knowing anything at all about the Seaway, flew over and looked down at the area just east of Prescott and saw all these, the pentimento of houses and farms and streets and locks through the water, and took wonderful pictures of them. And that told him that there were all sorts of voices of the past that had the capacity to rise up and reveal themselves through this water that had been rendered clear by zebra mussels. So many environmental threads come together in that one statement. For a couple of years, the St. Lawrence was open to scrutiny because it had a pest that was clearing the water, which everybody wanted clear, except it was wrecking all sorts of other things. So it's that it still is a story of what do you lose and what do you gain when you deal with an entity that maybe should never have been harnessed in that way. So there's that one. I'm adapting a Marianne Alice, Brian Doyle's book, told by a young woman, and that, if you remember, up to Low, it was 20 years after the building of the huge dam that flooded so much. This is a young girl working in Low at the time of the dam being built, when it was a massive construction camp, and her river was going to be lost. And it's quite a beautiful story, but it's a story very much like a Seaway story, and it's a story about the age of rocks, the history of that valley, the profundity of its own story, how the Gatineau Hills pushed up. So it's, you know, told against this enormous timeline. And so I'm working on Marian Alice, and then I'm doing dramaturgy for a young woman who's written a play about her Bosnian Muslim family who had escaped the siege of Sarajevo. Yeah. So it's very contemporary, and I hope that somebody picks it up and we can produce it.
This is my last question, I think.
Okay.
So you've seen a lot of changes, I think, probably during your theatre career, good and bad. How do you see the future of theatre and perhaps our festival during the pressures of these pandemic times?
I'm an optimist for the most part, particularly for smaller companies. If smaller companies can survive, and I'm thinking particularly about the St. Lawrence Shakespeare, by being flexible and reflective of what's happening, and always making ourselves important to whatever community we happen to be in. So I'm not so, you know, the big theater companies, we had the huge upheaval a couple of years ago with the large theater companies, whereby we lost a lot of male artistic directors. We had a lot of scandals that came out as a result of power and sex and all the kinds of things that sort of poison the situation, poison the ground. So there were changes starting to happen that we don't yet know how well those are going to work. Like I'm optimistic because suddenly I look at theater companies across Canada, and the diversity is quite evident that we're seeing more women. We're still seeing lots of men. That's fine. We're half the population each. We're seeing many different faces, different colors, different. So I'm optimistic that the energy that has been stopped by the pandemic will not be stopped forever. We're going to have people who really decide, you know what, it's such an uncertain way of making a living. I'm going to look for something else. And that's fine, because we've always had that. You know, you think of all the people you know who used to be in theater, are now working at the universities or whatever they're doing. And, but there are always people who are thinking, maybe I should be doing theater. You think, well, if you want to, maybe you should. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. I don't think it's going to stop. I just think it'll be less, probably less money. I think will be more challenging. But I think the possibility of joyful interaction with community is fantastic.
I agree. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you, Richard. That was fun, a fun chat.